On August 31, 1985, serial killer Richard Ramirez walked into a convenience store in Los Angeles. At first, he seemed like any ordinary shopper. But then, he noticed his own face on the cover of a newspaper and ran for his life. By that point, Ramirez was already considered the main suspect in the brutal Night Stalker murders that had terrorized California for over a year. But authorities had only just released his name and picture to the public while he was traveling back to Los Angeles. This gave residents plenty of time to memorize his physical features and point him out to authorities as he dashed out of the store. It also gave Ramirez very little chance to get away. But of course, he still tried to escape. The ensuing chase involved 7 police cars and a helicopter that tracked Ramirez throughout the city. But an angry mob of bystanders caught up to him first. Enraged by his heinous crimes, they began to beat him relentlessly, and at least one man used a metal pipe. By the time the police arrived, Ramirez was practically thanking them for arresting him. Richard Ramirez, who had been dubbed the Night Stalker by the local media, had started his brutal killing spree a little over a year before his arrest. In that time, he murdered at least 14 people and committed countless other violent acts. But his life of crime started long before that. Welcome back to True Stories. Join our family in exploring some of the most twisted true crime cases. As always, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe. Now, let's get into it. Born on February 29, 1960, Richard Ramirez was raised in El Paso, Texas. Ramirez claimed that his father physically abused him and that he sustained multiple head injuries at an early age. One injury was so severe that it reportedly caused him to have epileptic seizures. To escape his violent father, Ramirez spent a lot of time with his older cousin, Miguel, who was a Vietnam veteran. Unfortunately, Miguel's influence wasn't that much better than his father's had been. During his time in Vietnam, Miguel had raped, tortured, and even dismembered several Vietnamese women. And sickeningly, he had the photographic evidence to prove it. He often showed little Richie photos of the horrors he inflicted upon the women. And when Ramirez was just 13 years old, he witnessed his cousin fatally shoot his own wife. Shortly after the shooting, Ramirez began to transform from a scared, abused boy to a hardened, sullen young man. From developing an interest in Satanism to becoming addicted to drugs, Ramirez's life took a dark turn. Even worse, he was still under his cousin's influence, since Miguel had been found not guilty of the murder by reason of insanity. Miguel ultimately spent just 4 years in a mental hospital until he was released. Before long, Ramirez developed an obsession with the same kinds of sexual and physical violence that Miguel had inflicted on the women in his photos. Ramirez also began to have more run-ins with the law, especially after he moved to the Los Angeles area in California. Though most of his early crimes in the late 1970s and early 1980s were related to theft and drug possession, it would only be a matter of time before they escalated to unspeakable violence. For a long time, Ramirez's first murder was believed to have taken place on June 28, 1984. It was then that he killed 79-year-old Jenny Vinco. Not only did Ramirez stab and sexually assault his victim, he also slashed her throat so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. But decades after Ramirez was arrested in 1985, he was also linked by DNA evidence to the murder of a 9-year-old girl, which took place on April 10, 1984, months before the Vinco murder. So that may well have been his first killing, unless there were more that happened before that. After the Vinco murder, it would be several months before Richard Ramirez struck again. But when he did, he pursued his depraved impulses with horrific dedication. On March 17, 1985, Ramirez's murder spree began in earnest with an assault on Maria Hernandez in her home. Though Hernandez managed to escape, her roommate Dale Okazaki was not so lucky. That evening, Okazaki became another one of Ramirez's murder victims. But Ramirez still wasn't done. Later that same night, he shot and killed yet another victim named Silian Yu. A little over a week later, Ramirez murdered 64-year-old Vincent Zazara and his 44-year-old wife, Maxine. Sickeningly, it was then that Ramirez began to establish his signature attack style: shoot and kill the husband, then assault and stab the wife. But his murder of Maxine was especially ghastly, as he'd gouged out her eyes. For months, Ramirez would continue to stalk and murder more victims in California, striking fear in the hearts of people all throughout the state. One of the most terrifying things about Ramirez was that he was willing to kill just about anyone who crossed his path. Unlike some other serial killers who have a type, Richard Ramirez murdered both men and women and preyed on victims both young and old. At first, it seemed like Ramirez was only attacking people near Los Angeles, but he soon claimed a couple of victims near San Francisco as well. And since the press dubbed him the Night Stalker, it was clear that most of his crimes happened at night, adding yet another scary element. Disturbingly, many of his attacks included a satanic element as well. In some cases, Ramirez would carve pentagrams into his victims' bodies. And in other cases, he would force victims to swear their love for Satan. All over California, people went to bed fearing that the Night Stalker would break into their homes while they slept and perform an unspeakable ritual of rape, torture, and murder. Since he apparently attacked at random, it truly seemed like no one was safe. The LAPD increased their presence on the street and even created a special task force just to find him, with the FBI lending a hand. Meanwhile, the public anxiety was so intense around this time that there was a noticeable surge in the sales of guns, lock installations, burglar alarms, and attack dogs. But ultimately, it was Richard Ramirez's own mistakes in August 1985 that led to his capture. After he was spotted outside a witness's home, he accidentally left a footprint behind, and he also left his car and license plate in plain sight. When the police tracked down the vehicle, they were able to find just enough of a fingerprint to make a match. By that point, they had already received tips that someone with the last name of Ramirez was involved. Sure enough, the LAPD was able to identify Richard Ramirez thanks to their new computer database of fingerprints. And even though the records only included criminals who were born after January 1960, it just so happened that Ramirez was born in February 1960. Authorities soon found Ramirez's mugshots from his prior arrests, and one of his surviving victims came forward with a detailed description that was quite similar to the photos. By the end of August 1985, police decided to release the Night Stalker's image and name. Though they initially worried that this would give Ramirez a chance to escape, it turned out that he was blissfully unaware of his newfound publicity until it was too late. By pure happenstance, Ramirez was traveling back to Los Angeles when his photo was released. So he didn't realize that he had been tracked down until he was back in the city and he saw his own face on the newspapers. Though he attempted to flee the police and tried to steal a car in the process, he was tracked down by a vigilante mob that recognized him. They beat him up until the police finally closed in. After his arrest, Ramirez was found guilty of 13 counts of murder. In addition to the murder charges, authorities also found him responsible for committing several rapes, assaults, and burglaries. Ramirez was sentenced to death in the gas chamber for his crimes, and he smiled in response. The Night Stalker later said, "I am beyond good and evil. I will be avenged. Lucifer dwells in us all." That's it. During this extended delay, Richard Ramirez met a female admirer named Doreen Lyoy who had struck up a correspondence with him. And in 1996, he married her while he was on death row. "He's kind, he's funny, he's charming," Lyoy said 1 year later. "I think he's a really great person. He's my best friend. He's my buddy." Obviously, most people did not share her feelings. For the countless Californians who lived in terror during the mid-1980s, Ramirez was little better than the devil he worshipped. We've come to the end. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe. Till next time.